Alright, here we are. Creed 2 review. I've been waiting so long to see this film. Since before we ever got a trailer. Basically, since I saw the first one, I'm like, they gotta make another one. And then I heard, several months after the first one, that they were going to make a second one, and ever since then, I've been anxiously awaiting this thing. It's one of those movies I've looked forward to more than most movies. Like, I probably was more pumped about seeing this than about seeing Avengers Infinity War. No lie. I was that psyched to see this thing. And if you know, I made a very bold prediction for this film back in February, I think, before we even got a trailer. And then even when the trailer came out, I saw it and I doubled down on my prediction. I thought that Rocky was going to die in this film. And I have to say, I was wrong. That's right, I was absolutely wrong. Even throughout the film, though, I thought it might still happen. Like, I'm watching the movie, the way it's lining up, it seems like they could do that in this. It didn't play out the way I predicted. So, you guys were right. I was wrong. I still, though, in all honesty, and this is not just to toot my own horn or whatever, like, I think it would have made for a more substantial film. Not saying I didn't love this movie. I absolutely enjoyed it 100%. I loved it. I loved that it basically incorporated a lot of Rocky films. Like, they didn't just mimic Rocky 4, which you would think, since they're having Ivan Drago's son in it, bringing back that whole dynamic, that it's going to be a more like Rocky 4 film. But to me, it had huge elements of 2, huge elements from 3. Like, the way it played out was very, like, they took stuff from the franchise. Like, they took Adonis having a child directly from Rocky 2, like that whole storyline from Rocky 2. They took the getting beat early and having to come back and fight a second fight against the same opponent straight from Rocky 3 with Clubber Lang. The main storyline of this film did line up the way I thought it would, which was being in line more with Rocky 3 than any of the other films. Being that there's a first fight, he loses his will, doesn't know, who he is anymore, and has to dig deep and realize once again why he does what he does, and come back and have a second fight with the same villain, if you will. So I love that. I love that they didn't just make it a friggin' carbon copy of Rocky 4, that they put a lot of elements from all the films in it. I thought that was done really well. Let's see. Something they did in this that you've never really seen done in any of the other films, save for maybe Rocky 2 with Apollo's story, is they showed you the big bad story. They showed you the other side in this film. They showed the Dragos, and they made you feel emotion for those characters, and that had never really been done other than Apollo, like I said, done in these films, where they show you kind of the other side of the curtain, where you've got there's a real story there, and you actually feel for the Dragos. Like, when in Rocky 4, he was just this machine, this very mechanical villain, right? And you didn't really know anything about him. But this one, the movie actually opens to, Creed, like, what their life is like over in Russia, or Creed, Drago, and what their life is like over in Russia, the Dragos, and it shows Ivan, and he's training Victor, and how they're living. Basically, it was an underdog story for the Russian characters, where they were basically poor. After Ivan Drago had lost his fight in Rocky 4, basically he had lost everything. The government basically spat him out and he was nothing to them, living on the streets. His wife left him, and actually she's in this film as well, and she not only left him, she left him for another person high up in the government. Like, literally, she's just like a bandwagon jumper who's trying to be where the money is, where the lifestyle is. And it really, I don't know, it did pull on the heartstrings, though. Like, you felt for Victor Drago. And that's something I thought that this film did really well, and it was something that they did that none of the other films have done. So I will absolutely give that to this film specifically over the other ones. I really thought Rocky was going to die in this thing. The way it played out is obviously, you know, I mean, in the end, Adonis wins. Spoiler, right? In the end, Adonis wins in the rematch. Okay. It still was Rocky making this now about Creed, which I thought Rocky dying would do better than anything, okay? But even in, like, the final scenes of the movie, like, Adonis wins, and Rocky is basically like, or Adonis is basically like, you know, come up here, you're part of this, and Rocky says, no, this is your time. This is your time now. And I think that was supposed to be, like, to the audience, you know what I mean? Like, it's Rocky saying, this is Creed now. This is the Creed franchise. This isn't about Rocky anymore. It's not Rocky's story. This is Creed's story. Which, that was my prediction of why Rocky would die in this. It would kind of, I don't know, hand over the mantle of the film franchise to Creed. And, but they didn't do it that way. They didn't do it that way. And what they did do, which I thought was great, is bring Rocky's son back into the story. Like, he had been estranged from his son for many, many years, since the Rocky VI film. Since then, Robert had a kid, gotten married, and moved to Canada. And Rocky literally had nothing to do with this family, had never met his grandson. And so I'm glad that they sealed that up. Like, that's something I didn't take into account when I was thinking Rocky would die in this film. They kind of needed to seal that up first. Or you can't have Rocky die as a you know, a deadbeat who doesn't know his grandkids or care to be in his son's life whatsoever. But yeah, even throughout the film, I thought they still might kill Rocky off, because just the way it was in the very beginning, Creed is talking to him and he's like, are you okay? Everything all right, man? And it was really, I think he was torn up about not being a part of his son and grandson's life. And I thought it was more like maybe he was sick, or he was just ready to go be with Adrian and he didn't want to live anymore. He was finished, just ready to pass on. But they didn't do that. Rocky didn't die. I was wrong. Once again, I was wrong. But I still hold this to be true. If he would have died, this would be a much more meaningful film. That is the only real problem I have with this film, is it felt cookie cutter. It felt, I probably built it up too much in my own head beforehand. That's something I try never to do. I try never to go into movies with expectations, especially big movies. I try to keep my expectations low, but they were really high on this one, and so it was a little underwhelming in the sense that it just wasn't as big. It wasn't as big to me. Like, it didn't make me feel as much. It felt very cookie cutter, like, okay, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And it didn't feel like there was a lot behind the transitions. Like, okay, Creed is broken. He's a broken man. And then Rocky comes back, and it's very quickly switches on, and now he's ready to train harder than he's ever trained in his life, and he's back in it. Whereas in most of the Rocky films, there's been some kind of serious breakthrough where that happened. Like in Rocky 2, it was Adrian waking up from her coma and saying, you know. In Rocky 3, it was Apollo coming to him like, this isn't you, man. You need to find out, get back to who you are, get back to the, you know, back to the grind, back to the original reason you do this. And that's kind of what they did in this film, but it just didn't feel as momentous when it happened. So there were some emotional moments in it. Like, I teared up when at the end when Rocky did go to visit Robert. I do think that if they make a Creed 3, Rocky will pass on in that film. And that's what most people were saying, like, no, he's got to die in Rocky Creed 3, but I thought maybe they'd change it up. Shit, man, like, you're going to have the exact same things happen that happened in the Rocky franchise, like, movie for movie? I don't think that's a good idea. I still think it would have been a more impactful and memorable film if Rocky had died in this thing, and that's not just me saying, like, I'm right and they're wrong. I still very much enjoyed the movie, but like I said, if I have to be honest, this movie would not go in my top 5 of the franchise. 100% it would not. That's not to say that it's not fucking amazing, and I loved it, and I love that we're getting more Rocky and Creed stories. Like, that's all. That's kind of like the same thing with comic book movies. Keep giving them to me, okay? Everyone's not going to be the best one, but I'm just happy that they exist. Because I never thought when I was a kid and all we had was Rocky 1 through 5 that I would ever get to see a complete resurgence of the Rocky world. And here we are, like, thank God. I just didn't get from this movie what I guess I just had my expectations too high. Not saying I'm disappointed, it just wasn't at the level I had it at. Another thing that I thought was underwhelming was the fight scenes. The punching, the actual fighting was fantastic. Much like the first film, I thoroughly enjoyed the fight footage in the first one and also in this film. But it was kind of weird. It seemed like they were in a vacuum whenever they filmed the fight scenes, and they were like in the ring with the characters. All the other Rocky movies, even in Creed, it felt much bigger. It felt like they were really in a big arena and there was lots of people. And in this one, almost felt like the people weren't really there. It seemed really like a little too quiet, a little too, I hate to use this word again, underwhelming. Like, it didn't seem as big as it should have, especially that rematch with the Russian. It seemed like, remember in Rocky 4, like, it just felt huge. It felt huge at that final fight. Whereas in this one, it didn't feel as big. Everything seemed like smaller scale, and I don't know. Maybe that was the intent, to make it more of like an intimate and make it more about the fighters. But it feels like when they're in that situation, it needs to be like, this is the moment you're in, and you're in this huge arena, and the crowd is, whether it's them hating him and then him turning the crowd in his favor, kind of like in Rocky 4. It was a much bigger deal when that happened in Rocky 4. When it happened in this one, it felt just kind of like, yep, that's expected. So maybe it's because it's kind of been done before, but I feel like the way that they filmed it, the fight scenes, for some reason, they just weren't as impactful. They weren't as big as any of the other Rocky or Creed films. So, yeah, this film wouldn't go in my top 3 of the 8 films that they've had. But still a quality film. I'll still watch it a million times. I absolutely loved it. I was wrong about my prediction. I'm actually happy I was wrong in the sense that Rocky's still alive. I never wanted Rocky. I just thought it was necessary for the franchise. And I'm sure that they will do that now that he has fixed that relationship with Robert. If they make a 3rd film, I think they will show the passing of Rocky in that film. But I'm glad they tied up that storyline. So anyway, that was my review. I absolutely love the film. It's not my favorite of the franchise, but it's still very, very enjoyable. I will watch it a million times. That's it. All right. That's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, click the like button, please. If you like stuff like this, where I just talk about movies that I love, TV shows, pop culture, nerd shit, comic books, stuff like that. If you're into that sort of thing, subscribe for more, because that's what I do here. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.